Today on the show, we have Rachel, a 44-year-old instructional designer and multimedia specialist who recently got her first pair of pointe shoes. We talk about ballet photography, self-acceptance, and performing as an adult. Enjoy! All right. Well, Rachel, I am super excited to talk with you today about your journey with ballet. It has been a little over a year that you've been in the studio, I guess, because you got your pointe shoes in January, which means it's been just a little over a year. Is that true?
Yes, I started in November of 2018 and never looked back.
Wow, gosh, the time just flies. I feel like we just had your preview lesson together.
That moment was one of the most amazing moments of my life, which sounds a little hyperbolic, but I had been thinking about going back to dance for quite some time and had always felt really nervous and really unsettled, especially because I had not been really dancing for 25 plus years. And I have that sort of dancer mentality where I have to do it right. So I was terrified of showing up at a class with teenagers or people who'd been doing it for years and just making me look bad. And when I came to your studio, I really appreciated the fact that it was just hey, come in, check it out. We'll see what you know how to do. And not only that, afterwards, you checked in with me and kind of got me over that hump of just self-recrimination and self-doubt after the fact. And so it's been amazing to be back. And it's definitely, the studio plays a huge part of that.
That's awesome. It's definitely scary to come back in the studio, whether it's your first time or you're coming back. It's like very, very nerve-wracking to put yourself out there and try something that's meant to be perfect. I mean, ballet is such a idealistic art form that it's difficult to be imperfect at it.
Yes, very much so. And I've seen this in the studio with all the other dancers. We have such a core of emotionally present and yet extremely perfectionist people that it almost feels okay. It's a safe place to like screw up.
Yeah, which is most of the time we are screwing up.
Yes, very much so.
But you danced as a kid though, right? You got pointe shoes, but you quit shortly after you got pointe shoes as a kid. Is that right?
Correct. I started when I was 3 because when I was a child, I started by walking on my toes, even as a baby. And I loved dresses. And so when I saw ballerinas with their tutus and dresses, I was smitten. I wouldn't wear pants as a kid. I only wore dresses that went flat out when I turned around. So ballet was a natural fit. And I danced from 3 to about 15. I went on pointe at 13 and danced with a troupe that traveled around. We'd go to the state fair, we'd go to senior citizen homes and other like community places to do performances. And it's funny, I was looking back at some of those photos and I tend to have a very expressive face. So if I'm thinking something negative, my face says it. But all of my performance photos, like right after this, I get off stage, my face is just glowing because that was my happy place.
You performed again with us at our first show last September. I know you were very nervous to perform, but you did it anyways. What was that like coming back? Was it similar to when you were a kid? Was it a different experience as an adult? What was that like?
It was hard. As a kid, I didn't have as much anxiety about performing because I didn't think about it. And as an adult, I have the presence of mind to know that I'm doing something and people are watching and to care what people think. And so I was incredibly nervous. I think I ate one granola bar that whole day and drank 1,000 bottles of water because that's essentially how I handle my nervousness. But it was also a much better experience because everyone else backstage was in the same boat.
Mm.
And there were people who had never performed before. There were people who had performed hundreds of times, and we were all sitting together and essentially having a slumber party sort of environment and playing with makeup, doing hair, running through steps and getting called, and we'd run out, go dance, come back in, and everyone would cheer, which was just a much better experience even than my childhood performances.
I wonder what the different, I mean, kids have a different kind of anxiety, right? It's not that kids don't have anxiety in a way, but it's a very different experience. And the things that they're anxious about are very different. Like you do have a deep fear of being judged as a kid, but maybe it doesn't play in the same way as it does now, you know, in terms of performing. Do you remember any differences there?
Yes, I think it was more not performing well as part of the group when I was a kid, wanting to not mess up because I didn't want the group to be upset, and wanting to not stand out. Whereas as an adult, my identity was more tied to my performance as opposed to being part of this larger group. Even if I'm in a group piece, there's still oh no, I could mess up and then I'm vulnerable, which I think is a really scary thing when you're an adult.
Yeah. Would you say your identity is generally now as an adult sort of wrapped up in your hobbies, or is it in your work, or what? It's just interesting to explore that. You mentioned identity here in the performing aspect. Do you identify as a ballet dancer? Do you identify as a, you know, as a instructional designer? What is that?
Um, it's quite funny. I was mentioning to my husband this morning while we were watching Swan Lake, and somebody on Twitter had responded to something I said about, here comes the goth ballerina. And when I was 15, I had long, dark cranberry hair, black nail polish, lots of black eyeliner, and ballet was my life. And now I'm 40 something. I've got long pink hair, pinkish red hair, and I don't necessarily wear black lipstick, but still lots of black eyeliner. And I definitely have still the goth girl personality, and I am a ballerina. So even though at 15 I was a goth ballerina, the fact that I'm almost 45 and people are again saying, oh, look, it's the goth ballerina, I feel like my core is present now because I'm in ballet.
You were a biker before this, right? Like you did
Yes.
competitive cycling, right? Not even just
Yes.
recreational cycling. Talk about that a little bit. And was your identity then as a cyclist? And did you adopt that identity, or did you always know you were a ballerina and were just sort of waiting to get back to that?
I always knew I was a ballerina. My cycling life, I always had bikes. I rode bikes when I was a kid and rode bikes with my friends. I tried racing because I have a very competitive nature. And I liked the idea of racing because specifically the racing I was doing was time trials, which is I start at a certain time, I finish at a certain time, and I'm racing against my own time every time. And it's very statistical, it's very repetitive, and I love that kind of stuff. So I can see my performance improvements and judge myself. However, it never felt freeing to me. Like I liked riding my bike, but I didn't like, oh no, now I'm going to go ride my bike out in the woods, or I'm going to go ride my bike down a street where I don't know where there's anybody. It wasn't something I felt like I could do just as a woman. There were some incidents that happened here on the bike path that were targeted towards cyclists, and I felt very cautious with engaging with the community like that. Mm-hmm. When I decided to try ballet again, every thought I had about biking went out the window. because ballet just feels right in my body. I don't feel competitive. I don't feel like I'm not enough. I feel like I'm on a journey with other men and women who just want to continually try to do better, and none of us are going to get there, and we all know it. I know I'm not going to be able to put my leg up 180-degree extension, and that's okay. I mean, the fact that sometimes I just get out of bed and put on shoes and dance is the most important thing.
It's really interesting the relationship you bring in from competitiveness into ballet. So ballet has so many aspects that could be competitive, right? Can your leg go higher than the person next to you? Can it go higher than you yesterday? Is it going as high as you want it to go? So it's great to hear you say that when you do ballet, you do feel like you're enough and you don't kind of get into those traps. How did you do that? How did you sort of not fall prey to those, kind of three things that I mentioned, and that mindset that a lot of us have?
I think it really helps that coming back, I was coming from an extremely statistically driven competitive environment. And I have the experience of looking back and saying, I used to be able to do this great, and now I can't. So I'm already coming from a point of having to gracefully accept failure and still being accepted, still being welcomed in that graceful failure has been huge. And even though I know there's been times when my brain decides to say, hey, we're going to start being really mean to you, and I might vocalize something, having teachers in the studio who are like, stop, don't talk like that. Everybody has the ability to turn a negative thought into a shared moment and a growth moment. In a lot of inspirational discussions, there's the growth mindset. And while I don't strictly adhere to a lot of woo-woo type of vocabulary, I think ballet is actually quite good at instilling that sort of methodical approach to a growth mindset. I'm going to do pliés, and I'm going to do pliés when no matter how advanced I am, I still start with a plie, and I still see the improvement. And there's going to be days when my plie sucks, where my knee is like folding in on itself and my butt is sticking out. But then there's going to be a day where I just go down and up, and there's no top and there's no bottom, and it's just a float, and I feel amazing, and it's just a plie. It's the very first thing we do. So there's not as much of a competition, and it's more of almost like a mind map. We're going to be in different places at different times, and sometimes it's going to be a great fit time, and sometimes it's going to be a terrible time, but it's all still part of this ballet world.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's interesting to hear, and I know you have a very creative mind, and a mind that sort of moves in a very nonlinear way. And so it's very interesting to hear you sort of mapping what we would generally consider to be a pretty linear process of ballet to the actually very truthful, kind of scattered sort of progress, and sort of more, all over the place isn't the word, but it sort of is kind of a varied journey along the way.
Yes.
Okay, so you don't think of ballet very linearly in your mind?
I do not. And I think that's probably because I never did a strict curriculum either. I jumped from studio to studio when I was a kid because we moved a lot. So there was less of I never followed the RAD curriculum or the ABT curriculum. And I've never had the goal posts where I'd had to say, here I get to this point, here I get to this point. And I think that actually helps, especially as an adult, because I don't have any external markers telling me I should be doing this.
Yeah.
And in so many other times in our lives, we have the inner voice telling us we should be doing something. And the only thing I should be doing is dancing and having fun with it.
So how does this relate to having goals? Do you have goals? Do you feel like goals are add a layer of pressure that we don't need? How do you feel about that kind of thing?
I go back and forth on that.
Yeah.
I really do, because I love to achieve. And so you can't measure achievement if you don't have a goal. And it's got to be specific, measurable, achievable, like on and time-based. But part of me just says, makes my goals more: dance 3 times this week.
Mm.
Make sure I'm putting on my pointe shoes for 15 minutes and doing little prancers just to get flexible. Watch 2 YouTube interviews that have people talking about their experience. Watch a ballet this month. And I think that that's more reasonable goal setting to allow me to integrate ballet into my life, rather than to turn ballet into a step-by-step process that I have to execute perfectly.
I love that. That's really awesome. I mean, ballet is so much about the journey that you really can't, like you said, predict when the end is going to come. You don't know, because life is very long and winding. As we've all discovered, now we're stuck at home. Surprisingly, right? Life is very long and winding. If you had a specific goal, that could be super, super disappointing. But if the journey is just keep showing up, you can keep showing up wherever you are and whatever you're doing, as long as you just keep trying and going and moving.
Exactly. And it's, instead of having those like specific points, for example, after watching Swan Lake this morning, I went through and searched other versions of the Dying Swan, just to get from the Maritsky's performance to, I saw a performance posted by a theater in Boston of Maya Plisetskaya performing it at age 62. And just turned the computer around and showed my husband, and he said, what the heck, when you turn 60, do you suddenly lose all the bones in your arms? Because, her extension of her arms was so fluid. And the idea that ballet can still be beautiful and an achievement and wonderful and an emotive experience, no matter what age you are, no matter what your physical shape is, that's something that people can't take away. Even if we're locked down, even if we are physically unable to dance, there's still ways to incorporate dance into everyday movements.
That's amazing. It's just really beautiful that we can all be doing it, no matter what the level that we're doing it at. I mean, we can all be super expressive. And I think that's honestly one of my favorite parts of teaching beginner adults, especially, is that a beginner from day one is extremely expressive. They have a life of experience that you draw on, whereas, a beginner 6 or 7-year-old child learning ballet for the first time doesn't have that same thing. They're learning the rote process of it. But an adult dancer from the first day of class they want to express. The expression is trying to come out of them always. And so you can, I mean, one of my favorite things to watch is a circular port de bras, because you can really see it in the dancers. They're really, it's a moment where you're moving and you can really feel the music. It's usually slow and pretty, and you're also kind of tired, so you sort of let it go a little bit more. And you can see the expression, all ages, all shapes, in the studio. And sometimes I'll just be standing there watching the dancers and just get chills from some of the beautiful movement that happens with all the dancers. It's really amazing.
That's such an amazing way to put it, because as someone in the studio in those moments, I have those experiences as well. Not just when we're all doing the same thing, but for example, we're taking turns doing a petit allegro across the floor, and everyone steps back and watches, and one person goes. And instead of it being, okay, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, you're doing that wrong, this person does it. We get it all, she gets across the floor, or he gets across the floor, and we all cheer. We all say, oh my God, did you see your arms? That was beautiful. Oh, I wish I could jump like you. My beats are so behind and yours are straight on. And it's, rather than a moment to put yourself out there and be critiqued, it becomes a moment to celebrate and move and be.
Yeah.
And I think that is just, and it feels so good.
It feels great. It feels for an individual sport, there are some really awesome group moments.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it is an individual sport, but also it's like having a studio of beginner to intermediate adults. We have the best core. I mean, we are a corps de ballet that is incredibly amazing, that has the ability to pull out soloists as needed, but we all come together and we all follow along because we have a culture that we've created. And some people will be stronger in certain parts of it. Some people want to be more social. Some people want to come in and just practice, practice, practice. But we all get together for watching a performance and then going out and having snacks after. And those nights end up going till 1 o'clock at night because everyone is so passionate. And that, I think, really is the core. I mean, I say core as in C-O-R-P, but also the core, C-O-R-E, of the ballet experience.
It's awesome. It's really with the adult environment. I mean, it was probably with the kids too, but we're so close to the adult community right now that it's really, it is a community. It is our friends. It is our circle. You know, it's someone who gets it. You know, they can see the progress. Like, oh, you pointed your toe a little farther than last week. How great is that? Like, that kind of progress is the kind of thing that we can get super excited about with each other, and then really help each other kind of celebrate the little wins.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's so much, and just somebody saying that, oh, your ponche was gorgeous. Do that again, and I'm going to take a picture so that you can have that.
That's the best. Speaking of pictures, Rachel, I do have a topic here that I want to make sure we cover, because you are a photographer and you've photographed dancers in our studio, and you photograph many other things as well. But I want to ask you a couple of questions about photography. I want to ask you about like just some general tips for taking photographs of yourself, if you have any quick ones. But also I want to ask you about what it's like to look at yourself in a photo, and how we should be as dancers when we have a photo of ourselves, what we should see when we look at it. So let's maybe start with some lighter tips, like maybe some ways to think about when you're being photographed, or, you know, taking even a selfie of yourself, and then kind of get into like when you look at it, so you're not just, you know, super negative with yourself.
Right. What I would do is, my first thing that I tell everybody is learn your angles. And that sounds silly, but especially for selfies, it's so important. And in the entirety of time when I've been a photographer, I have photographs going back to the very beginning where I'm holding a large format film camera, looking into a mirror and taking a picture of myself. The self-portrait is a concept that has a history in photography. So society has given a lot of negative feedback to women on the selfie culture. And I hate that, because there is nothing better than making a picture of yourself for your own consumption, and to elevate yourself and say, look at how I look to other people. And so for taking selfies, especially as you're dancing or anything, learning how your camera works, whether you can set it up with a timer or anything like that, just to basically take the technical away. Don't worry about that part. Just learn the tools you have. That's my first argument for anybody. Just the best camera is the camera you have. Second, learn your angles, and that's knowing that the closest thing to the lens is going to be the biggest thing. So while I take a picture of my dog with his nose closest to the lens and it looks adorable, if I take a picture with my knee closest to the lens, it doesn't look great. But I also don't want to take a picture where my hips are closest to the lens. So think about lifting your camera up and using that. It's just like with dance, go up to go down. Go up with your camera, and that way, as you're doing an extension and you have the timer on and you take the picture, your arm is going to look long, your body is going to look long, you're going to have an angle that you're aware of. Take 100 selfies. Keep taking pictures. Take as many as you possibly can. They're just digital, like bits and bytes of data. If they look bad, delete them. get to know how you feel in front of a camera so that when someone starts to bring out the camera, you can just whip out that angle, throw your shoulder down, look up. I have a tendency, if I'm not posing and not aware of the camera, I have a very toothy laugh smile that just looks like I have like all teeth. But my camera is on me picture face has this very like, I lift up my neck, lengthen it just like in ballet, and lift up my eyebrows, and I call it my anime eyes because it actually looks like I have like the like straight across half moon top eyes based on the angles that I work with. And it's completely a construction of angles. It's my eyes don't look like that. They're small and weird.
I guess it's interesting that you talk so much about angles, especially because ballet is angles, right? Like the reason we do croisé instead of facing front or effacé instead of facing front is for the angle of your leg. It's the angle of your leg in relation to each other. It's that you have an open line or a crossed line versus facing front where your leg looks very short. It's everything is all about angles. So I think when we see ourselves on picture, it looks so different than when we see ourselves in the mirror. And sometimes that can be a really jarring like it can be really jarring when it looks different than either A, you imagined it looking, or B, that what you see in the mirror. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like why is there such a discrepancy there? What's going on with that?
Well, our eyes are stereo vision, first of all, where a camera is a singular monovision.
Just can you break that down a little bit for people who maybe haven't heard those
words?
So
you have your eyes, if you close one and then you close the other, you'll see the like what you're looking at in the world is just slightly off because your brain is processing it and putting it together. With a camera, it's just one lens and it has a singular point of perspective. So there is no function within the camera of trying to shape space. There is no, while some of the technology can say, oh, I recognize this as a face, that's still all AI and all just recognized patterns. The camera doesn't actually have an emotional impact. It's always the photographer who sees the emotion and it tries to capture that. The camera is just making a photocopy, essentially, of what it sees.
Very flat. Whereas you're saying the stereo vision is more depth. There's more depth. There's more roundness to it, but the camera is very flat.
Plus, like when you see things in action, live vision, you're getting not just what's in front of you, you're getting what's in the complete 360 view. And I think the best way to sort of understand this is if and I was actually thinking about that this morning while watching Swan Lake again. I know I always feel frustrated when I see myself performing on camera because I feel like it's flat. But then I watch the Kirov Ballet and these dancers who live and breathe ballet performing on stage for a camera, and it's flat. So the camera actually has to move through space and they have to create these performances specifically for recorded purposes by getting different angles and by breaking things down, because otherwise it just looks completely flat. That's just the nature of camera vision. So I think it's really important to learn and remember that that's just a different way of seeing. It's not going to be what you see in real life. When you have a baseline of understanding, especially I take a lot of selfies, take a lot of videos. When you know what you're looking at for yourself, then you can actually look at those selfies and videos from class or practice or whatever and say, all right, I know I'm actually looking at the curve of my foot here. I'm looking and I see I'm sickling. That's the important part of this image. Or I'm looking and that extension is way bigger than I thought I had, and I'm super proud of myself. It's very difficult to critique yourself in a positive way, I think, because the culture expects us to all, especially as women, especially as dancers, to look a certain way. And I think going out and just taking the photos and performing in your grubbiest grubbies and your hair not done, no perfect buns, no makeup, and just looking at how you look in those pictures is a great way to start to feel more in love with how you represent yourself and feel in love with yourself as a dancer.
That's awesome. I hope that helps. Some people really start to be able to take video of themselves and take pictures of themselves, because I know, from the photography that you've done in the studio, Rachel, where, dancers see themselves, they've never seen themselves as a ballerina before or as a dancer, they see themselves in a new light. And photography, if you can get past the initial shock of how different you look on photos than you do in your mind's eye or in the mirror, the photography can really help you can help you see your identity, and can help you really solidify that you are a beautiful dancer, and that there are aspects that you normally would nitpick in your head, but that on a photo you can see just the holistic picture of how gorgeous you are and how far you've come, or whatever goals you wanted to see with that photo. It's really, really powerful.
Mm-hmm. It is. And I love the idea of self-documentation as a tool for strengthening one's own identity. It happens, being in my 40s, several of my friends have gotten divorced, myself included. And I have noticed a very strong correlation between people coming into their own as single people, and all of a sudden they're taking selfies everywhere, all the time. And it's not even just a matter of how good or not good they look. It's just a matter of being able to say, this is the tool I'm using to see myself without judgment. I am present. I am here.
That's really sweet. I love that. I kind of just got chills. That was super sweet. I love it.
Awesome. I'm glad.
Well, Rachel, this has been such a fun conversation. Do you have any last tips that you would want to spread out to the world? I know you've already given us so much awesome information and motivation and inspiration, but do you have anything else that's been on your mind that you want to make sure to share?
I would say my biggest takeaway, and since I'm known in the studio for this, is don't be afraid to have fun with this. Be a dork, be silly, be ridiculous. Post videos of yourself dancing badly. Dance badly in the studio. And finish your combination and throw up some jazz hands because you just did something good or bad. It's fine.
Awesome. Ballet is serious, but we don't have to be super serious along the way, because it's like we talked, it's going to be a long and winding journey, so we might as well enjoy it along the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, awesome, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Julie. I really appreciated the time to talk to you today.
Very, very fun. That's all for this episode, dancers. Thanks for listening. For more adult ballet, follow me on Instagram at Julie the Ballerina, our studio at Broche Ballet, or check out our blog and YouTube channels for even more content. You can now also dance with us online. To have your story featured on our podcast, email us at hello@brocheballet.com. Today's show was produced by Jackie Dolman and the YouTube version by Shanoa Rangel. I'm Julie Gill, and this was Broche Banter. Happy dancing!